So I wanted to talk a little bit about gravity and arm weight in piano technique and give a little bit more in-depth information. So a while ago I posted a short that went super viral, over 1.5 million views at this point, and I was talking about gravity and arm weight in piano playing and actually showing some clips of different pianists who seem to be using this kind of technique. Now, one of these pianists in particular, Rubinstein, I know for fact used this technique, and it's pretty obvious when you watch him, but he's been quoted as actually talking to people about these ideas, so it's not really a question of whether or not he used these techniques, but a lot of people seem to be kind of confused by these ideas because, of course, it's a short 60 seconds, and you can't go into too much detail. And basically in the short, hopefully all of you have seen it, but I talk about letting gravity just pull your arm down. I got into trouble because I said push your arm down, so I'll be more careful now, but letting gravity basically push your arm down rather than physically using your muscles to push down. And what happens is that you can actually be at rest on the key bed, right? Because what you're doing is you're letting the weight of your arm, because gravity, right, or actually weight rather, is the effect of gravity on an object, right? So our arm has weight because of the gravitational pull of the earth, right? So and there's actually a lot of other writers who have talked about and actually use the word gravity. Some people, I think, felt like I was just trying to be too clickbaity about it, and I kind of was, because I was trying to make a video that people would actually watch. But that being said, or get more views, but in any case, that being said, it helps you be at rest at the bottom of the key. So, for instance, an exercise, and you can find these online, there's other people that teach these similar ideas, but basically, you make a loose fist and you just let your arm fall into the keys. And when you're sitting, or when you get to the bottom, then you just sit there, right? You're not still pushing. Sometimes it can be helpful to do that on like a tabletop, because the tabletop isn't a keyboard, and so we don't have the sensation of putting a key down and holding it down. So sometimes people can do weird things with that because they're used to pressing and pushing and all that kind of stuff. But the idea is you just let your arm just fall into the keys, and then it's just sitting there, right? And so then you can say, okay, now I can do the same thing, and I can just do it on a single finger, right? Now, obviously, you have to be able to, support the weight on a finger. Now, again, some of you will be very familiar with this idea, others less, but I'll just say a couple words. It's not really so much about strength. So this is something that comes back again and again and again, and say, well, so-and-so, I'm trying to remember the name of the teacher. You'd all probably recognize it. He passed away, decades ago at this point, but it's like, oh, so-and-so said that, the more weight, the stronger your fingers have to be, etc. Okay. The sensation of strength, or the illusion of strength, has to be more. But here's the thing, right? It's just like when you stand, right? You're not strong because you can stand. You're strong if you can squat down to the floor and stand back up. Sure, that's, there's maybe middle-aged or older people that can't do that. They literally don't have the strength to do that, right? In certain muscle groups. But when you stand, your joints are aligned so that it doesn't take strength to stand up, right? Your joints, your bones are literally supporting that weight, right? So it's the same thing when we play. And you can experience this by playing, in weird positions and say, well, it's much harder to hold my hand up, but if I'm in the correct position, now it's easy to hold my hand up, right? And what that directly implies is that it's not so much about strength, it's really more about the position of your joints and how easily they can be stabilized and just bear weight through them, like that, right? So, that being said, you can just practice dropping. You can practice dropping on multiple fingers, right? Now, one thing that people brought up is that you can't really just use a free fall, right? So let your hand just totally freely fall into the keys all the time because you lose control. Now, there's actually truth to this, and I would generally agree with this statement. A pure free fall is more of a teaching tool, okay? So people that have it in their minds that playing the piano is a matter of pushing down, okay? Whether with the fingers or the arms, well, if you push with the finger, the arm is going to push too. But if that's in their minds, then it's very important to teach this idea of you don't push, right? And a lot of times they'll say that and people are like, this is the twilight zone. What do you mean you don't push? Okay. And that's this idea of weight, falling weight, okay? It's just like my arm comes down and it just sits there, right? So my weight's just sitting there. That is a very different sensation than pushing down and continuing to push at the bottom, right? Now people say, well, you can accomplish the same thing by just relaxing at the key, at the key bed, right? So I use my finger to push the key down, but then when I get to that key bed, I just relax, okay? But what mechanically is actually happening when people do that, okay, is they're actually just positioning their joints so now they don't have to push anymore because the weight of their hand and finger is actually just holding the key down. That's what's actually happening because otherwise you can't relax, right? You can't actually relax in the key bed because these muscles constantly have to keep that pressure to keep the key down, right? If you're doing it by pushing with the finger, using these muscles in your arm, there always has to be that tautness to push the key down, right? Okay? So teaching the idea of falling weight, and having that pure free fall is incredibly important, very, very important. However, the next step in that process is learning to control the falling weight, okay? Now, to avoid any amount of confusion, I think this is the best way to think about it. If someone jumps out of an airplane, they're falling, right? Well, what happens if they pull a parachute? Are they still falling? Yes. But it's a controlled fall, right? This parachute is designed to control their fall to a point so that they won't get injured when they hit the ground, etc. Well, just because I'm controlling how fast my arm is falling down doesn't mean that I'm not falling anymore. I can do this. I'm still falling. There was no pushing involved. Absolutely no pushing, okay? When I hit that key bed, I can relax, if you will, because there was no pushing to begin with. It's all about positioning the joints so you can bear weight through. You have a bad position of those joints, you can't fully relax into the key bed because it takes much more effort to stabilize these joints. And so my muscles, the small muscles around my joints and in my hand, they can't really stabilize the joints fully. And so I feel these muscles starting to pull a little bit. And I go to here, it's gone, okay? So again, it's not really so much strength, it's about positioning, the joints in such a way that we can actually do this, okay? So controlling that weight down. Okay, and I remember my teacher and mentor, I remember the first time she told me, okay, if you want a louder sound in a chord, you drop from higher. And it was like, oh my gosh, that's so, it's so simple, and yet it's so counterintuitive in many ways. I would never have thought about that, right? Okay. And one of the reasons why that works, and one of the reasons why I would stand behind the statement that it does take less effort, less muscular force in that sense, right, is yes, you can argue and say, well, you had to lift your arm higher, and so therefore you use just as much effort. The problem is a lot of times people try to play from the surface of the keys because they're always worried about missing keys, right? And so they play from the surface of the keys. Well, what happens is the key goes down like, I don't know, less than half an inch, right? And so you have to accelerate the key downward over like that much space, that takes an immense amount of muscular force and torque all at once, right? And see how like these fingers are spasming? And when you hit that key bed, what happens? You have to have this very conscious sort of like, okay, stop pushing now. And it's very difficult to do that, right? I see this all the time with students. You know, they're trying to play loudly, and so they push, it's like really hard, lots of force, right? Versus, now that was a combination of letting my weight fall more, so more free fall, and a little bit higher. But see, it looks relaxed, it looks loose the entire time because there's never a sense of I'm pushing, now I'm not, okay? You can't really play the piano like this. Now, I've heard a lot of people talk about, you know, how basically everyone who plays really well, Martha Argerich, you know, Valentina Lisitsa, Marc-Andre Hamlin, you know, you name it, they're all really playing like this, whether they realize it or not, because that's actually how the playing mechanism works. It's like everyone who walks and who walks well and doesn't have problems, right? They're all doing it the same way. Now, someone would say, well, playing the piano is not like walking. It's you know, very simple. Playing the piano is complex. And I get that, right? But think about something else, right? Everyone who throws a football accurately and very far is doing these same things because it's science, right? It's biomechanics. Every pro golfer, they're using the same technique. That's why they can do what they do, okay? Whether they realize it or not. And so that's my personal opinion on that. And I've seen a lot of evidence to suppose that that's true. And I'm still trying to sort of find more sources and more information to sort of support those claims. But that's kind of my opinion with that. So what happens is that this way of playing, it means that there's never any pushing really. You know, even if which if I'm playing a really big chord, I'm not going to push, I'm not going to go from the surface of the keys. And normally, even if my fingers don't lift off the key, my wrist comes up because then I can actually let my weight sort of fall a little bit more. But I can still play from the surface of the keys and let my weight just fall into the keys. That takes extreme muscular control. Extreme muscular control, okay? If I start from up here, right, it's easy to let go as a gradual process and let it fall down. If I'm right here, that's much more difficult. And so it takes extreme muscular control to learn to do that. But the first step is learning to just let your arms fall, okay? And so usually with my young students, you know, beginners, what I'll do is I'll start them by having them play everything. I say bounce, you know, bounce on the keys. So lift before each note. And this is really good in a number of ways. It teaches them that the arm, the finger, the wrist, everything moves together. You know, a lot of times when people play, their arm doesn't move, right? Well, really, when we play, this is all connected. If this is moving and this is not moving, something is going to be held in a stiff position. It's going to cause tension. It's not going to work right. Everything is connected. You cannot possibly hope to move this without something else sort of moving, okay? So when I play my thumb, look what happens to my arm. My arm goes down with my thumb, okay? It's not natural to play like this. That is not normal. It's not natural, okay? So it teaches them everything moves together. It also teaches them to not push, or at least push less. The other thing that it does is it helps them learn to be able to let go of the keyboard. Just let go and come back down to the keyboard. I don't actually have to be right here in order to play the right finger. In some sense, it's a little bit more challenging at first because there's a lot of coordination that has to be developed very quickly. But in the long run, it's so much better. And in general, by doing this, I've, you know, had my students play with less tension, just play more freely and more naturally. Now, sometimes I still have students that will kind of like, they'll do that and their hand looks like this. It's very awkward, right? But you know, a lot of times what's interesting is they'll just play like this and it's like perfect. It's perfect. And I don't even have to say anything about it. The other thing that happens too is there's more lateral shifting. So when you're lifting like this, it's more natural that if I'm going to play my fifth finger, my arm sort of shifts over a little bit, right? And that's an important thing too, so we don't laterally stretch the hand out like this, okay? If I'm playing on the surface of the keys, I might have a tendency to do that more, where I'm sort of, you know, reaching like this, which of course puts me at an immediate disadvantage because my fingers don't move very freely when they're stretched out. But if I'm going to lift on each one, every time without fail, even if they're trying to keep the thumb over here a little bit because they're worried about getting back to that note or something, they'll still shift over more, and so there'll be less tension. And it's usually a gradual process, but it helps develop those sort of attributes in that. So I think it's important to understand that, you know, this way of playing, you know, it's not, you know, obviously people don't play scales by lifting and dropping their arm on every note, okay? And in that particular, the original short, I was talking about playing chords loudly, for instance, okay? Try playing a chord very loud from the surface of the keys. Even if you use more of this sort of, you know, follow-through motion in your arms, that will help alleviate the tension that will result from accelerating the key down from, like, you know, less than half an inch, right? However, it won't alleviate it completely, and it's going to be difficult to get the sound that you want because it's either too much acceleration, not enough, because again, you're accelerating like that much, right? That's really hard to control. If it's a little bit farther, it's easier to regulate that, okay? But also, obviously, yes, people don't play scales by lifting and dropping their arm. So the video originally was specifically about playing loud chords. However, in a more broad sense, this method of using falling weight to play the key, it's about teaching or changing how we think about playing the piano. So when I'm playing a scale, it looks like, you know, it looks like I'm using just my fingers, right? Well, I'm not, right? I play my thumb and guess what? I'm just sitting here with my weight, okay? And I can raise my finger as much as I can, and I can slam it down on the key. I'm still not pushing though, right? Because what happens is when I hit that key bed, joints align, and my finger stops traveling down, and now it just supports that weight, okay? In the same way that, you know, if you take your foot and you lift it up and you slam it down as hard as you can on the ground, do you continue push or do you just naturally stop pushing? Well, you just naturally stop pushing, right? Because your joints know how to, when they get to a certain position, okay, stop pushing anymore. Now we're just supporting that weight and we're delivering it into the ground. So that's an important thing to understand. You'll see, and because people say this all the time, well, look at so-and-so, they have really active fingers and they're just using finger technique, well, okay, whatever. But they're not. They're not. They have very active fingers. Yeah, you can have really active fingers, right? The thing that's important is what's happening on the inside. Are you pushing or are you just supporting your weight? See, I'm not pushing at all. I'm just supporting my weight. And it doesn't matter how much finger motion I'm using. And it's actually natural to use a little bit more finger motion, for instance, the faster you play or the louder you get, because I'm actually helping accelerate the key down. I have a certain amount of weight sitting at the bottom of the key, okay, and my finger, by slapping the key essentially, it actually helps accelerate the key a little bit. See, that was less sound because I didn't really slap the key too much, okay? So as I do this, I don't have to use much finger motion, right? That's less, that's more. The more finger motion I use, the more non-legato it sounds. starts sounding louder. So you can use that kind of like finger technique in conjunction with this, and ultimately the finger technique isn't, contradicting the arm weight technique. It's not contradicting any of this. It's going alongside it, okay? And I think that's a really important thing to understand. So a lot of times, people will say, no, that's all just nonsense, Really the only thing that matters is you don't want to isolate your fingers, right? But the problem is that most of the time, people don't actually know what that means. They'll say things like that, but they don't know what that means. They'll say, well, you have to have some arm movement, or you have to, relax your wrist, or this or that. Well, actually, it's not so much a matter of relaxing the wrist when you have technique that's functioning correctly. What it is your wrist is dynamically moving and changing in its position all the time when you play. And if you think of it as just occasionally I need to relax, that by definition means you have problems, right? You shouldn't ever get tired. You shouldn't ever get fatigued when you're playing. And if you do, it means that there's something wrong. And that's a very, very important thing to understand. So I hope this was interesting, informative, and I hope it kind of cleared up some different ideas and things surrounding arm weight technique, using gravity, all that kind of stuff. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. Always love hearing from you guys. Thanks a bunch and have a great day.